there, and that goes like that. Well, alright. We're ready for the first viewer. This is gonna be great. I have so much to complain about. Oh, hey!
If you're going to trespass into my home, rifle through my things, then at least have the decency to join me for supper. I'm bloody hungry.
Wait, what did you say? I have a question. What would you do if somebody broke into your house in the middle of the night, on the top of a mountain, in the middle of a blizzard, all during a demonic uprising? Do you really invite this rando to stay for dinner? Really? Well, maybe you do. I don't know what you're into. Diablo 4! I know a lot of you have been waiting for this, to finally move on from Diablo 3. I certainly have. And lucky us, the marketing up to release was all looking pretty good. And Blizzard seemed to have made a turnaround. Judging from the aesthetics anyways. I mean, just look at the first time they showed us the new villain.
Blessed Mother, save us.
Well, that was one hell of an introduction. Surely dark themes and mature storytelling were back on the menu. We could finally take Diablo seriously again. Right?
Runs like a beast. Usa, shouldn't you be responsible?
Well, I guess not. While the gameplay turned out to be okay, the story was a superficial bore. It was just interesting enough to grab our attention while they jab us in the back with a syringe of predatory game design. Yeah, I know, this has become the norm for AAA studios, so you may be asking, why bother caring about this at all? Why don't I just move on with my life and let Blizzard be Blizzard? Well, I'm not moving on because they tricked me. So, as with Diablo 3 and other relatively modern Blizzard titles, the storyline is a secondary formality on the way to the dopamine farm. Thank goodness for the advent of the skip button.
Rathma, the first necromancer.
It sounds like they're searching for Lilith's son, Rathma. Together.
But you better believe Blizzard is thinking the same thing. A way to please everyone without actually putting in extra thought of any kind? Sign us up. And as if to confirm that they know the way they structured this campaign gets in the way of the gameplay, they kindly allow us to throw it entirely in the trash upon completion, never to be appreciated or considered again. How merciful of them. With a crutch like the skip button to rely on, for a AAA studio anyway, the idea of actually giving us something authentic, or dare I say meaningful, is a distant and comical dream. I can't help but wonder, why Blizzard are you even bothering to produce a campaign? If your intention is to spend resources on a production that stands in the way of your gameplay, why are you wasting your time? It seems like the idea of a storyline is as tedious to you as your end product is to me. This campaign was so mind-numbingly boring. And you know, it really didn't have to be this way. Because surprise, if you're Blizzard I guess, this gameplay storyline presentation balance has been done before, very successfully, with far more skill, restraint, and humility. By Blizzard themselves. So let's talk about one of those games, to use as a point of reference against Diablo 4's failings. Of course I want to talk about Diablo 2. Surprise! This is now a Diablo 2 retrospective. Kidding, of course. But I mean, in all seriousness, I'm not entirely sure how this is possible. If you produced a masterclass in the genre in terms of concise, trim, and efficient blending of storytelling and gameplay, would you not examine what went right before proceeding to create a sequel? I mean, honestly, the lack of self-awareness here is kinda hilarious. In playing the game, Diablo 4 revealed to me that it just doesn't understand itself. Every step in the campaign was an exercise in watching a game step on its own toes. And hey, if it became too boring to endure, at least we have that reliable skip button to fall back on, eh? Then, to add insult to injury, as if Blizzard's right hand has no idea what the left is doing, Diablo 2 was quite recently remade, and done so by a group of developers who demonstrated what respect for a project looks like. Side note, if anyone should be given a crack at the next Diablo game, it's this group. I would take an authentic failure from them over another cynical machine-like production from Blizzard proper any day. So, aside from the tedious bore of the modern, conventional MMO-style choreless presentation of Diablo 4's narrative, what went wrong? Well, the writing produced a paint-by-numbers fantasy demon story, wherein the characters behaved in a way more concerned with satisfying tropes than emotionally engaging us. At the top of the trope pile, you have Lilith herself, who is dismantled as a threat, piece by piece, as the campaign goes on. She starts off with a very strong introduction. The opening cinematic at the very least was stylish, but she begins a downhill slide from there that reveals her to be a posturing, insecure weakling, which is only magnified when you contrast her against the unstoppable force that is our player character. She just can't compare. I have to admit that upon reaching the final climactic encounter against her, any minuscule threat that Lilith may have manufactured just pales in comparison to the one that I brought to the table. I felt as though she were just a yappy formality standing in the way of my next big loot drop. Which is what will happen if you don't utilize a shroud of mystery to torment your players' imaginations into action. She became familiar to me. I knew most of her tricks. She was tangible, predictable, and could only talk shit by the end. Not exactly the kind of outcome one should want in a monster story. Diablo 2, on the other hand, handled our emotions and imagination masterfully, without getting in the way. Oh, Diablo 2. An example of what a game looks like when the people creating it understand exactly what it is they intend to make. A demon-slaying, dungeon-crawling loot fest with a narrative driven by short and emotional cutscenes. I mentioned imagination before, and that is certainly an important tool to pull on when telling a story, and a mandatory one when working with a monster story. But that's only half of the equation here. See, in order to complete the 1-2 combo and really drive home the assumptions our imagination is making, we need a perspective into the horror that we can empathize with, someone whose shoes we can stand in from time to time, and have their emotions channeled into us, coloring our perspective with their own hopes and fears. I am, of course, talking about the true MVP of Diablo 2, good old Marius.
Forgive me, Tyrael, please.
When we first meet Marius, we find him a broken man. He is a world-class underdog, and has obviously suffered tremendously. All within a single cutscene, we learn about his frayed emotional state, his wayward life, the cosmic scale misfortune of being tormented by the literal devil, but we're also inspired to hope that perhaps he might find something to save within the Wanderer. Marius endears himself to us immediately, wasting no time. Simultaneously, the Wanderer inspires intrigue, and then the game just gets on with it. Pure, unadulterated efficiency. No pomp and circumstance, just function. The result screams respect for what the game and the story require to work well together. Instead of droning on with monologues or having characters argue about accountability or blaming others for their own problems in the world, Diablo 2 strikes right at the heart. It goes right for our emotions and does not hinder our imagination by overstaying its welcome with a game world bloated by tedium or constant exposition. We can't help but want to see where Marius ends up next, and we are fascinated by the Wanderer's struggle to hold on to his humanity. Marius gives us a window into the world through which we can dip our toes. Our picture of things are limited by his own small perspective. Our view of the Wanderer, the primevals, Diablo himself, come through Marius and the mind-bending trials he endures. It's through his terror that we're able to understand how scary these demons are. On the other hand, with Diablo 4, we're flooded with characters that are a struggle to relate to. They're juggled in and out of our story just as they become too predictable to endure. It's never able to stick it out with a single set of characters. Instead, the game flits around, hoping that something will stick. And just in case we forget the point of it all while we're slogging through this cluttered malaise of busy work, it really is never long before we're hammered over the head by a monologue from Lilith. Or worse, we're forced to watch her exposit to her hype man Elias while carrying an odd air of self-doubt, posturing and promising as she does.
Go to the dry steps and continue your preparations. Now, our true work begins.
Like, just who is she trying to impress here? Elias? He's already a team player. He's in, lady. The Kool-Aid hath been imbibed. So who then? She could only be talking to Elias or herself. Both options betray uncertainty and weakness. Either way, she's posturing like a child. Hold on. Did she wink at the camera? Let's double check the footage.
Where are you going, Brain?
Back to the cage to plan for tomorrow night.
Why? What are we gonna do tomorrow night?
The same thing we do every night, Pinky. Try to take over the world.
Close enough. Moving on. When playing through Diablo 2, I'm reminded that the idea of a skip button is almost a laughable insult. The amount of narrative value being provided in such a compact package forces the player to remain engaged. And unfortunately in Diablo 4's case, it is a necessity. So why is that exactly? What could have been? Well, let's inventory what we have to work with in terms of characters and overall plot, and have a look at where we could take things with a few fundamental adjustments to the existing campaign. Starting with Lilith, the crux of the whole damn thing. Her foundation is solid, but she's betrayed by repeated exposure. Ultimately, we become familiar with her by the end. She stops being an elemental horror capable of anything our imagination could conceive, and is reduced to being little more than a human with demon wings, with frail wants, needs, desires, hopes, and plans. Less is more in her case. I would worry most about how she's presented. Let's channel less Queen of England and more T-Rex. Like that guy did. Next up, Inarius. I mean, who cares? He's window dressing the character. Throw him in the trash. And no, I don't care about his relationship with Lilith. Next, Lorath. More like Borath, am I right? Anyway, I suppose he's functionally mandatory for my final point, so I'd hang on to him. But we need to spend more time with him to allow us to appreciate his failures more thoroughly, and willingness to be accountable to himself and to right the wrongs of his past. And maybe, who knows, develop a personality with the extra screen time? Pro tip, if a main character's only redeeming trait is alcoholism, that's a sign you still have work to do, Blizzard.
I like to think I triumphed.
Lorath.
On to Nyrel. An emotional, entitled, and judgmental child. A stellar combination. The first character we're meant to empathize with, but fails utterly because she would rather complain, blame, and make assumptions than to stand up on her own 2 feet against the horrors of the world. She just follows us around until it's convenient to randomly decide that she knows better and will go off to take action without forethought. Instead of endearing her to us with humility and bravery, they opt to make her hold everyone else accountable for the wrongs done to her. Quote, "I'm trying not to hate you," end quote. That is, more or less, an actual line she speaks to us, the player, after having saved her life. She's a complete and utter failure of a character. Just join Inarius in the trash.
There she goes.
Donan and Yorat. I'm gonna lump these two together, because they actually have obvious potential as a pair. But as a result of Diablo 4 lacking the courage to stick it out with a particular dramatic wheelhouse, we really don't spend enough time with them to fully appreciate their relationship, nor the tragedy of their journey. One could wipe the rest of the cast away and pull an emotional narrative out of these two if they wanted, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to ditch them because, in my opinion, Elias is the character that least lived up to his potential. While Lilith slowly degenerated over the course of the campaign, Elias threatened greatness while going nowhere. He just served as a tool for the narrative or to facilitate meaningless member berries. The fact that Blizzard decided to not go for the low-hanging fruit with a redemption arc between Elias and Lorath is astounding to me. They could have cut away all the fat, placed Elias in a Marius-esque role, and allowed us to see Lilith through the eyes of a devotee who may have become disillusioned during his journey with her. Slowly, he could have realized that perhaps this elemental being's methods were not in the best interest of the world, nor humanity, facing, in horror, that he may have been wrong, and could have doomed the people he sacrificed his humanity for. In the end, he could recount to Lorath his regret, much in the same way Marius did to Baal, to give us a brief and human window into the demon world. Anyway, I feel like that would have been a decent direction to go in terms of making a connection with the audience. It would have also tied up the unresolved conflict between Elias and Lorath we ended up with. And as an added bonus, the kind of brutality that would be required to shake Elias's resolve would have given Lilith free rein to behave in a way that was truly frightening on her ascent to power. To be clear though, I understand that these changes would really muddy the waters. More work would be needed. I mean, when it comes down to it, I'm just trying to suss out an emotional hook from this mess. Nothing else really matters. I can take the rest of the campaign or leave it. Although do add that weird swamp witch to the trash list, please. I can't even remember her name. Boiling down Diablo 4's narrative into the most essential components, shrinking the cast, getting the hell out of the way of the gameplay would have gone a long way to make things more compelling. But if Blizzard gave us a perspective on top of that to care about and carry us through the story emotionally, they really could have created something truly memorable. And that is something they used to know how to do. You know what? Here, Blizzard, I'm going to do you a solid. Let's do what you obviously didn't. I'm going to dissect the simple and direct way in which you emotionally hooked your players decades ago. This really won't take long, I promise. This one cutscene exemplifies everything I've been talking about. We start by establishing context and begin building anticipation towards a meeting. We're introduced to our barbarian, who gives us a display of conviction and bravery. We utilize uncertainty to waver his conviction. And now we find that initial courage countered. Reality begins to set in. Our barbarian knows who this is. It's Bale, and he is not impressed. In kind of a dick move, the guys operating the door also realize who this is. Our barbarian looks back to see if anyone is actually coming to help him. The answer is no. He finds himself abandoned to his duty. But he musters his courage. He turns to look certain death in the face and speaks for his people with bravery to deny Bale.
The gates of Sescheron have stood for eons beyond remembrance, and you shall not breach them now.
This is the high point. The emotional hook has been established. We now care about what happens to this barbarian.
You shall not be allowed to reach Mount Ariat.
But just as we're becoming comfortable with this level of defiance, Bale kicks us in the face. He reminds us that he does not care what this barbarian has to say. He doesn't care what anyone has to say. He's here to take what he wants, and nobody can stop him.
I shall take your position into consideration.
Least of all, his new toy. This poor barbarian that we came to admire.
Well, it seems your terms are not acceptable.
And there you have it. That is how it is done. In just under 4 minutes, we are endeared to a barbarian of Ariat. This one man speaks to their collective courage. We're practically forced to empathize with their predicament as a people. And the player, in all likelihood, is now locked in. They should want to fight for the barbarians. On the other side, we learn about how little any of that matters to Bale. He is a force that cannot be reasoned with or threatened. And with those thoughts in mind, we are done. From that point on, we are free as the player to explore the game world without interruption. Yes, there are quests and conversations to be had, but they are explored mostly at the player's leisure. There are no stupid rituals to open the town gate, no meetings with religious leaders that waffle on about nothing for a few minutes, just a game world to explore and a game to play. Oh, and did you notice how Bale didn't have a hype man to brag to? Bale isn't making promises, threats, or posturing to anyone. He just acts. He takes what he wants. He doesn't need support, admiration, or power from anyone. And as cool as Lilith looked in her introductory cutscene, what did we learn about her in all that time? Mommy save us? That's really just a revelation of Elias's expectations. Lilith is kinda just there. And who are we endeared to? Obviously the intended target was the priest. Was he a priest? But there's nothing to admire about him. He's just an injured tool that becomes a dead tool, carried from problem to problem, solving them for his merry band or Elias. Feeling sorry for him is a bit like feeling sorry for a chicken in a McNugget farm. I mean, sure, you can feel bad in a way, but it's not like you respect the chicken or relate to it. We admire the barbarian for his actions. He faces down death despite his crippling fear. On the other hand, we're asked to feel for the priest because he's a guy seeking knowledge and just kind of goes with the flow. He even just gives in eventually. This guy has no spine, and that's a problem because the threat of a villain does not ride on their ability to pontificate to the camera and twirl their mustache. Their threat need only be implied, because our emotional state in a monster story rests entirely on what could happen to the characters we care about. Emotionally investing us in one of your characters is a give and a take between the villain and that character. Bale's impact in that cutscene was directly proportional to how much you cared about that barbarian, and the dread of what Bale could do to him. With the exception of an underbaked Donan and Yoren storyline, which was headed in a good direction, Diablo 4's campaign ultimately failed to give us anything to care about. Man, I miss games like Diablo 2 being a thing to look forward to. Of course, I know many of you have long since tuned Blizzard out entirely, or have fully embraced their sticky agendas, so my opinion may be falling on deaf ears in a lot of cases. But damn it, I love Diablo, and I want this studio and these talented people to do well. I want them to create memorable things that are capable of adding to the lives of their players. Who knows, I may be back in a decade to check out Diablo 5, if it ever happens despite Blizzard's thrilling ambition to create games as perpetual life-sucking services. But it's easy to just assume the worst and dismiss them forever, so I'd rather allow myself some degree of hope. I've been pleasantly surprised before. I'm always open to it happening again. Am I done? Oh my god, what is this magical feeling? I have been cleansed. The video is done! I'm free! Leave a comment or don't, I don't care. Later, suckers!